Welcome, beautiful people of all ages, shapes, and colors, to another episode of the Hit Your Free Throws podcast, where we encourage you to stick to the basics. I'm one of your co-hosts, TV, aka TV on basketball, alongside my co-host Jay, aka Knockdown Jay. How's it going, my guy?
Hey, playoffs continue to progress well. We are getting some crazy games. Obviously, it looks like the finals for both sides is going to lead to us getting an eventual new champion one way or another. I mean, Celtics are backed against the wall here.
Hey, I mean, I thought the Celtics were going to be down after Game 5, but apparently they still got some life left in them. But at the same time, there's a lot to talk about in this episode, Jay. There's a lot of stuff happened since the last time we recorded. We had the NBA playoffs, so we had so much news around that. Jay, we probably had the craziest draft lottery in like the last, like ever. I don't know.
Oh yeah, especially when you factor in the prospects at the top. See, last year this exact scenario happened,
but no one cared.
The odds and everything else. But like you said, no one cared just because the prospect pool was so different. Knowing that this was a 2-player draft, pretty much coming into it, or at least top 3 was kind of the consensus focus for this to happen with this team, with this player, man. I mean, it doesn't get any more controversial. It doesn't get any more, discussed than this. This is one of probably the most impactful lotteries we've had in a while. And not just Dallas landing at number 1, but San Antonio landing at number 2 adds to the excitement of what could be a really crazy offseason in terms of moves across the league.
Yeah, no, there's so much to break off with that, to talk about to break down with that draft lottery, man. And I'm not going to say anything, Jay, but we kind of called it. We kind of called that.
Hey, mock lottery predicts all, bro.
Mock lottery does predict all. But yeah, lots to talk about. Some major injuries happening as well. This is just going to be an action-packed episode. That's what I'm basically saying. So make sure you strap in, get comfortable, and join us on the ride, because there's going to be a lot of NBA basketball to talk about. But before we do that, we do have to plug our socials. Make sure you follow our individual socials at TV on Basketball, at The Routine Jumper. Those links can be found in the description down below, all our socials and everything. In terms of the Hit Your Free Throws podcast, follow us on TikTok and Instagram for the best of NBA content, where you got the recaps on all the games. You have the clips. You have us like reacting to the NBA draft lottery and everything. All of that stuff can be found on the Hit Your Free Throws short form pages, TikTok, Instagram, even the YouTube shorts. We've been killing on the YouTube shorts, so be sure to check those out. And turn to the YouTube, remember to like, share, and subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you will not miss an episode. And if you're listening on any of the podcast networks, make sure you subscribe, leave a review, all that good stuff. We appreciate all of you guys tuning in and supporting us throughout the entire NBA season, playoffs, and all throughout the year. Jay, you ready to get into it?
Bro, we have a lot of NBA to cover. And it's crazy. It's so much happening in the NBA that the WNBA season kicks off tomorrow after we record this, and we don't even have the time to get into it right now because of how crazy the league has been over the last couple of days.
Luckily for us, Jay, we're going to have, by the time we talk next time, we're going to definitely talk some WNBA for sure, but we're going to be down to 2 series, so it's going to be definitely a lot easier to kind of like have the mix of both, get the best of both worlds in that point. So we're going to get into it. It's just, Jay, you mentioned a lot to talk about, and we're going to start off with probably the most interesting series of the second round. Each series is like interesting in of its own. There's a lot of storylines going into it, but in terms of competitiveness on the basketball court, the one series which I think can actually go 7 games. Let's talk about the Nuggets Thunder, Jay. Currently, the Oklahoma City Thunder are 3-2 up. By the time you have your listening to this video, you're gonna know whether the Nuggets get eliminated after tonight, or if the Thunder are moving, or if the Thunder lose tonight and the Nuggets force a game 7. So there's gonna be a lot of there might be a huge change after today. But what we're gonna talk about here, Jay, is that the Thunder are 3-2 up. Obviously, the Nuggets got a couple of games, especially with some great late time basketball. And I think they're really the focus of the series. And when you look at the games which each of these team won, it's the importance of depth, because even I want to look even at Game 5, which is the latest game of the series. Jay, the Nuggets had basically nothing besides Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic. Nikola Jokic, who struggled in Game 3 and 4, he struggled there. But then the Nuggets were a lot more the Nuggets had a better chance of winning, especially in that Game 3 where Nikola Jokic said himself he was one of the worst players on the court. But because of how great the rest of this team was, they were able to pull out the win. The Thunder, in those 3 games you're looking at, yes, Shea has been great, but you've had, the big time performances from the people off the bench. You have a good Chet Holmgren game, a good Jalen Williams game. As much as the stars have been showing out, the depth of each team has been absolutely massive. Jay, how important has depth been in this series specifically?
I mean, this series specifically highlights the impact of depth from the perspective of having multiple guys to be able to guard some of your best players. I think this obviously leads more in the favor of OKC. I'm going to mainly focus on them because Denver does not have as much depth as we would like. I think depth is actually the thing that's hurting them to a certain extent because for Denver, it's a lot less guys to come for the ride with Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray. If those two guys are on a heater, but they have nobody else with them, they're still only going to average about 65 to 75 points per game combined in a given series. Even with them both playing at absolute heater, they can only carry but so much against an Oklahoma City Thunder team that has multiple bodies to throw. It's not a coincidence that Isaiah Hartenstein, that Chet Holmgren, that Jalen Williams, Jay Will, all are getting significant time. Mainly, I want to focus on Jay Will in terms of the depth aspect of it. Jay Will's been averaging about 10 to 12 minutes a game in this series, and it's literally just to come in there and play roughhousing with Nikola Jokic. It's nothing more than for him to be another physical body alongside Chet Holmgren, alongside Isaiah Hartenstein, as guys to put bodies on Jokic. Not necessarily slow him down. We know that's not possible. My boy just had, 44 and 15? You ain't necessarily going to stop him, but you sure as hell can slow him down and make his shots more difficult, of course, right? And Nikola Jokic has dealt with foul trouble a lot throughout this series. There's been a lot of games that have ended with Nikola Jokic 4 and 5 fouls, nearing being out of the game. And then when you look at the other side for it with Oklahoma City at the guard spot, Aaron Wiggins, Cason Wallace, Alex Caruso has been huge in this series, huge as a defensive menace on both sides. Specifically against Jamal Murray, but all across as a general on the perimeter defensively. Those three guys have all gotten significant minutes, mainly to create defensive hell. I'm not gonna lie, this has been a series.
Threes. They've been really damn good at hitting their three balls.
Definitely coming. Alex Caruso's had a very strong series from beyond the arc. Something that I think we were all kind of wondering. And when they acquired Alex Caruso, the biggest question I remember when we had this conversation about the acquisition of Alex Caruso in the offseason was, can he hit threes at his old clip back when he was playing with the Lakers? Because if he can be a 36 to 37% three-point shooter, adding the perimeter defense that he brings as a havoc creator on the perimeter against some of the better guards in the league, he is not only going to be like a dark horse contributor for this team, he's going to be a guy that mess around and closes games. And we saw that in games 4 and 5, right? More specifically, right? So he's now playing up to what we all kind of assumed was going to be a real role for him if he could knock down shots at a high clip. Shot 50% from three ball in game 5, right? So that kept him on the floor. So on the flip side, it'll be interesting to see how you feel about the Nuggets side of it. But for me, I think this is the quote unquote chemical imbalance of the Nuggets, where they're almost so good with that starting five. We've said for years they have the best starting five cohesively in the league in terms of productivity. And even though that starting five has rotated guys out, whether it be Bruce Brown or KCP, they're still just super duper effective. But that third guy, it's always been a question every single year, even dating back to the title year. Who's that third guy? They constantly pass the baton around, but when you pass that baton and it hits the floor, it ends up being a game like this one where Jokic and Jamal Murray go off and they have nothing to show for it. So it's tricky, bro. It's tricky.
Yeah, no, 100%. And when I look at depth in this series, yes, of course, it's just the multiple guys in terms of the defensive end for the Thunder. We could just throw out there and just be like, okay, yes, maybe Aaron Wiggins and Isaiah Joe are not better defenders than what we have already, but they're still going to make it very difficult for you guys. Yes, Jalen Williams is not to the caliber of Isaiah Hartenstein and Chet Holmgren, but he's going to stick with Jokic for all the time he's on the court.
Right.
What I think when it comes to depth in this series is being able to close games and having more options for guys to close games. Because when you look at the last game, especially in Game 5, the Nuggets had Nikola Jokic and Jamal Murray going off. Aaron Gordon, yes, he didn't have the best game, but you know what he brings to you, especially on the defensive end and being able to hit threes at the third option. But the 4 and 5 option, Jay, has always been just a struggle in the series for the Denver Nuggets compared to the Oklahoma City Thunder. Christian Brown, Russell Westbrook, Peyton Watson. Those guys have just been fluctuating so up and down throughout the entire series. Michael Porter Jr., I didn't like the fact that he was out there at the end of Game 5 because, he's still having his shoulder problems, obviously, but I felt that even though Russell Westbrook wasn't shooting great, he at least was giving it on the defensive end against Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, who had a good game, but definitely like Russell Westbrook made it hard for him.
Mm.
The Thunder, on the other hand, they know that Shea's finishing games. They know that Jalen Williams is finishing games, and then you can have either one of Isaiah Hartenstein and Chet Holmgren. But Jay, they have so many options. Like before Lou Dort hit those 3 threes in Game 5, I was like, I think they need to finish with Cason Wallace. He's been playing so good defensively, running the floor, and just being that secondary shot like ball handler next to Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. But then Lou Dort hit those 3 threes. I'm like, okay, let's keep him in the game because he's actually starting to hit some shots. But
Right.
you got Alex Caruso. You feel comfortable ending games. You have minutes for Jalen Williams at the end of games, and we haven't even really thought of the point of Aaron Wiggins, Isaiah Joe ending games, just because they have so many. They have a plethora of options.
Yeah.
And although I think that the Nuggets stars are outplaying the Thunder stars, when it comes to like the roster as a whole, the rotations as a whole, the Thunder are just able to get just enough from everyone to pull out these games. And if like maybe one player that you're used to seeing on the court for the Thunder at the end of games is not doing as well, they just have other guys that they're able to go to, and I just don't think the Nuggets have that. It's like 100% based on the guys that are performing, and you're not going to get many Jokic games where he scores like just 20 straight, like just 20 points only, and you're going to win because of your bench player. That's just not how Denver operates.
Yeah.
But it's the difference of just like being able to have like flexibility in your fourth quarter lineups, because it shows, especially like in the last 2 games, where people thought, oh, the Nuggets were definitely gonna, if it gets close, the Denver Nuggets are definitely gonna outperform the OKC Thunder.
Yeah.
Well, the Thunder have more options. They have different guys that are able to step up. While the Nuggets, yes, Jamal Murray and Nikola Jokic were the majority of your points in the fourth quarter. But who are the other guys that you're gonna trust at the fourth and fifth players in your closing lineup? We don't know that, and I think that's been the stark difference in the series.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest thing, too, is it's another series similar to the Minnesota Timberwolves series of last season, where the depth at center particularly is being exposed, right? This is yet another series where a team comes in with 3 different versatile centers that provides floor spacing in a certain type of way and also are all active as either shot blockers or burly bodies that can put a physical pan on Jokic throughout any given game. And it's one of those things that creates difficulty. Similar to that Minnesota Timberwolves series, it wasn't necessarily the idea of actually stopping Jokic. That was probably not even a part of the game plan, was to stop him. It was to create a physical presence on that side of the floor to make sure that every bucket that Jokic gets is well earned, right?
And it's very similar in this Oklahoma City Thunder series. I think one of the things that the Oklahoma City Thunder learned last season from their loss to Dallas was their lack of depth at the center position. Also was a reflection of their lack of physicality that they carry within their team. Because again, we can take it back to even the free throws conversation, right? And Shai Gilgeous-Alexander has not been getting to the free throw line at the same kind of clip in the postseason. We all kind of anticipated that would be something to have to factor in. But again, we've been saying this for the last 2 to 3 years. This team does not get to the free throw line. That is also a reflection of your physicality, that this team is not in the trees, does not finish around the basket, physically getting themselves to the line as much as you would think for a team that drives as much as they do, for a team that runs in transition as much as they do. They do not get to the line as much as a team, and it's because they do not play physical basketball. They play very open-ended, very open-minded, and it very is much making the right decisions, but it doesn't create any type of presence for them. I think that was one of the things that hurt them a lot, outside of PJ Washington absolutely losing his mind from 3 last year, right? But outside of that, I think the lack of physicality in the middle was why Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford were able to do so much against them last year. I feel like they took that to heart with the acquisitions that they've made. Hartenstein, no pun intended, being one of them, but also in a series like this one, leaning more into a Jay Will in this situation, having a Chet Holmgren be more of a plot down, deep drop defender as a guy who just, your focus is to be a rim deterrent. He is not out here to score. He took 9 shots in game 5. This is not a guy for context, Isaiah Hartenstein, 10 shots, not that much more than him, right? But Isaiah Hartenstein had more field goal attempts than Chet Holmgren. Some of that was off of putbacks and things of that nature as well. But to kind of put it in perspective, this team has a different edge to them now, and it's built out of their depth. But it's an identity that they can switch to, which goes back to something we said at the very beginning of the postseason, before anything actually tipped off, which was Oklahoma City might be the team that has the most chameleon-built roster in the playoffs, because they have everything you need to face any of these teams they could see in the postseason, East or West, when it comes to personnel. That's where the depth comes in.
No, 1,000,000%, man. And the problems that we looked at the Thunder last year, obviously the youth was a big thing, but also like you said, the depth at the big man position, being able to have like honestly the reliable fifth guy at that point from last year, like who you're able to trust. They've filled out both in the offseason. Like and like it's not like they had to jump through hoops or anything. They're like, oh, we'll just trade for Alex Caruso then. Oh, we'll just use this money to sign Isaiah Hardenstein.
Right.
And that was it. That was basically the moves that they made, and more than enough to suffice, to be completely honest.
Right.
And like you said, the chameleon effect, where they're able to, change their defensive scheme or play a different way depending on the matchup they have, has been absolutely massive. And again, and now they have an overabundance, it feels like, of guys that they can be able to end games with, and that's always such a good problem to have. So shout out to the Thunder for getting up to this 3-2 lead. Not going to count on Denver just yet. You can never doubt the man known as Nikola Jokic in the playoffs. And man, I'm just gonna tell you right now before we move on to the next series, bro. When he hit that freaking Sombor Shuffle 3 near the end of Game 5, I thought they were gonna win it there and then. I'm like, that just felt like the Anthony Davis shot all over again, where he just shot over 80, and I'm like, this is like where the Nuggets are just gonna win it, just because Jokic will just not allow them to lose. But shout out to the Thunder to bouncing back.
Yeah, facts. There's always that one iconic play from Nikola Jokic that just makes you wonder, like, are they about to heat up when we thought we killed them? And that seemed like the real swing point. At least it had the opportunity to be. But shout out to Oklahoma City Thunder, like you said beforehand, for keeping composure. They are going to have to go into Game 6 very focused. We obviously saw that the New York Knicks, their game against the Boston Celtics, we're going to reference that in a little while. Like, these are not teams that just because they're down, they're out. This is still a 7-game series for a reason. So, and I mean, you can make the argument that unlike the Knicks series, there's an argument to be made, regardless of who the MVP goes to, that the Nuggets still have the best player in the series. And
No,
you gotta be careful.
Yeah, no, for sure. I mean, Game 6 again. You guys can know the results by the time this episode comes out, but we've now seen it. Like, we've seen the Warriors play with their food last in the first round. Yes, they won against the Rockets in Game 7, but of course it was too close for comfort. You had the Knicks just get destroyed by the Celtics. You just don't want to put yourself in that position, OKC. So just let's see if they're able to pull it out, or we're gonna have the one Game 7. I do think this is the best series chance we got of getting a Game 7. So let's see if the Denver Nuggets can pull it out. Moving on to the next series, though, it is a series that's been completed. We have the Indiana Pacers defeating the Cleveland Cavaliers 4-1 in the second round. Jay, that Game 5, bro. Cavs get up early. Pacers bounce back. The Pacers have an absolute crap start to the third quarter, but bounce back in a way where you have Thomas Bryant hitting threes in the corner. For some reason, the entire team just got hot. Then they just were able to close out that game in Game 5, even though Donovan Mitchell was trying to will his way to his team to victory, but it just wasn't enough, and the number one seed in the East crumbles. Jay, your thoughts on the series?
Yeah, man. First of all, I guess Tyrese Halliburton's overrated. So I guess that's one thing that we have to take into consideration going into the Eastern Conference Finals for yet the second year in a row, right? Is that we have to be prepared for Tyrese Halliburton to continue to outplay expectations for those who have looked at him as a point guard who kind of is just like a product of a system that Rick Carlisle has induced, instead of being a guy who has clearly created the system for the Pacers in a real way. TV, we've been saying this all year long when it comes to Tyrese Halliburton. We had our trepidations about Tyrese coming off of last year when it came to the idea of everything post All-Star break with his injury. I believe it was a knee injury. He just didn't look like himself. And he showed sparks of it during the postseason last year. Obviously, they got to the ECF based off of the fact that he was just able to make timely shots. But it was always this weird passiveness with him that always made you wonder at the point guard position if he could usurp himself into that top 5, top 10 player in the league conversation. And then you have series like this one against the Cleveland Cavaliers where, like, you can make an argument that, I mean, it was a clear 1-2 battle between him and Donovan Mitchell for best player in the series, right, in terms of productivity. But Tyrese Halliburton, it was always less about his actual stat line and more about his productivity as a contributor to a Pacers team that feeds off of his energy. See, this is the difference between him and like a Jimmy Butler in the postseason, right? Tyrese Halliburton's play style, his identity is built around pass first shot creation, right? So he's never been a high volume shot
shot maker, shot taker at the point guard position. This dates back even to his time back with the Sacramento Kings. Versus Jimmy Butler, his version of playoff, takeover mode is him being more assertive as an offensive initiator, given the fact that he tends to be more passive during the regular season. The thing with Tyrese Halliburton, and the reason why I think that now we have to have all those people who voted that he was overrated need to take a second look in the mirror about what they believe should be properly rated versus what is overrated, is the impact of creating a play style. The Indiana Pacers are not only one of the fastest teams in transition in terms of creating baskets in the league, just built off of the fact that they have athletes like Ben Mathurin, like Obi Toppin, right, across the board. Tyrese Halliburton as a distributor. Me and TV have raved about how Pascal Siakam is one of the best transition finishers in the league, even dating back to his time with Toronto, right? We've been raving about this for years. But Tyrese Halliburton is what institutes this up-tempo play style. Interestingly enough, I believe that Rick Carlisle has just, quote-unquote, let him rock. You have to remember, Rick Carlisle is coming from a different lens where he wanted to play more up-tempo, and you saw it transpire in situations with the Dallas Mavericks back when they had Dennis Smith Jr., because the team would play faster when Luka Doncic wasn't on the floor. So you could tell that Rick Carlisle wanted to institute a more up-tempo offense. Tyrese Halliburton just happens to be the perfect puzzle piece, the perfect maestro, if you will, to institute that and then take it another notch by being such a second and third level degree kind of passer, right? When you focus on the Cleveland Cavaliers, and this is actually where I'm going to pass it to you, not necessarily us talking about them blowing it up yet or making any real adjustments just yet, just in terms of your thoughts on this series. My biggest question for the Cleveland Cavaliers coming out of this series is, why did the game plan change? And what I mean by that is, Kenny on his, I believe it was Kenny for Real, or it was Kenny 2, was one of those pages. He has 1 million, so obviously subscribe to all of them if you can, if you want to learn anything about hoops. But yeah, mentioned something I thought was really interesting, and I noticed it when I was going back and watching this last game, and it's the idea of the Cleveland Cavaliers stepping away from a play style that, quote unquote, got them here, right? Like, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. And it felt like one of those things where TV referenced the Cavalanche a lot throughout, not just the regular season, but definitely at the top part of the postseason in their first initial series, right? And it just felt like they played more hero ball in this series. It felt like they came into this series with this feeling of, Donovan Mitchell, we will go as you go. And you saw it through the 25-plus shot attempts and the desperate need for him to initiate offense in a way, and not even just his need to initiate offense, but it felt like they were passing the rock around in terms of who led offense in this weird, like, my turn, your turn focal structure of leading the game, leading offense, as opposed to just making the right play the way we saw all year long. They were never a team that was like high ranking in assists all year long, but it just always felt like they swung the rock around in a more cohesive manner. And in this series, they just like lost all of it. I don't know if they were overwhelmed by the speed of the Indiana Pacers. I don't know if this was their version of trying to slow the game down. But it didn't work. And I think it also took themselves out of their identity. This series, to me, TV, and this is where I'm going to pass it to you, my apologies. This series was further of an indictment than just, we didn't have Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, and DeAndre Hunter for a game. This went deeper than that. There was a philosophical change somewhere in this series that took the Cavaliers away from what's got them to the dance. And I think it cost them. That's the long and short from me saying to you, do you think the Cavaliers are still built to be the kind of team we thought they were coming into this postseason?
That's the thing. Like, I'm not sure, because like I'm of the camp that Darius Garland, like in the series, this felt super eerily similar to the playoff run from last year, where it was Darius Garland clearly not 100%. Evan Mobley, I mean, I feel like Evan Mobley would start to get into the series eventually, like as the series went on. But game one set such a tone with Donovan Mitchell. One, because obviously no DeAndre Hunter, no Darius Garland, no Evan Mobley, that he didn't like have those guys available, so they had to play Donovan Mitchell basketball at that point, where he basically like was their offense, is their offense. And they couldn't play that the Cavaliers basketball that we were so accustomed to. So when you have these moving pieces like going into like when you have these moving pieces with Darius Garland missing a game here, DeAndre Hunter, Evan Mobley, like you have these guys, I think like missing games like here and there throughout the series, and the fact that Darius Garland, you could just tell throughout the series, he just was not right, holding onto that ankle, sitting for extended periods of time, not being able to run an offense. Jay, I saw a stat like before the series where Darius Garland, I think, like was the primary ball handler for 52% of the game. Donovan Mitchell was, I think, in the 40s or maybe low 40s throughout the regular season. Darius Garland could not be a point guard this series. No matter what it was, he just like wasn't able to. Whether it was Donovan Mitchell already getting into his flow, that was the kind of the series that he like kind of thought in his head that he was going to play, or Darius Garland just wasn't 100%. And I think I'm not going to discredit the Pacers because the Pacers played great. They played the right way. They had everyone. I mean, we talk about depth. They have like this 6-7 man unit was just scoring at will. It didn't matter who it was. That's why it's so hard to find a freaking MVP of the series. I'm gonna still say Tyrese Halliburton, but MVP for the series, you can name like Pascal Siakam. Miles Turner had some big games. There's just like the Pacers roster as a whole just all seem cohesive in this series. With the Cavs, you couldn't get that. You couldn't have like a Darius Garland run offense as per usual. You had to run Donovan Mitchell led offense. Evan Mobley, I think because of that change, Evan Mobley couldn't really be involved in the offensive end as much. And you can see that in game 5. I mean, Evan Mobley started off the game so strong. He started off the game super strong in game 5. And he just went away from it. He completely went away from it as the game progressed. Jared Allen not being as big of a factor. So I think, yes, it was a deviate from the plan, but it's also the fact that Jay, it's just bad timing. And all of this stuff, like all the doubt that has crept into this like Cavs mind, just happened at the wrong time. I'm not gonna say that the Pacers weren't the better team because even when these guys are on the court and on the court, of course the Pacers were the better team. But going into the series, knowing that you're going to be missing like Darius Garland for multiple games, of course a game here and there for DeAndre Hunter and Evan Mobley, these are top 6 guys in your rotation. And when you mess with the flow of a team of the Cavs that have been kind of following this flow for like the rest of the season, having that change is just like was a freaking gut punch, and it absolutely sucked for the Cavs. And the Pacers, again, and we said since the beginning, this is not a team to mess around with. Yes, we thought the Cavs were better going into it, but if the Pacers, as they've shown last year, are now going into this year, any sort of chink in the armor, any sort of weakness that they could see in you, they're going to take advantage because they have so many ways to beat you, whether it's from the inside, with like Pascal Siakam, outside with Tyrese Halliburton and the rest of the guards that got healthy. They have multiple ways to win the series, and the Cavs showed their colors early, and the Pacers just kind of ran with it.
Yeah, I also think that we do have to give the Pacers a certain level of credit as their play style being a big part of the deviation for the Cavaliers as well, too, though.
They were a top 10 defense all year, and I think people don't talk about that enough. Like they've really improved on that end of the floor.
Yeah, I mean, of course, a lot of people speak about, and I've been a big proponent of this, is how fast they play, right? And how it speeds up other teams, and it can force people to kind of come out of their body a little bit because of the fact that they're a team that kind of can almost cavalanche you in a way, right? Not necessarily from 3, but just the way they create transition baskets. They make easy baskets at a high clip and very often throughout a given game. But I would also say on the defensive end, they have a certain level of versatility where guys like Andrew Nembhard and even Miles Turner to a certain degree, Pascal Siakam, they can all guard up and down the positional spectrum, and it gives them a lot of functionality, especially against a Cleveland Cavaliers team where once you get past, we said this earlier on in the series, once you get past Evan Mobley and Jared Allen, the size department for Cleveland desperately does get kind of, scarce, right? You kind of look at Dean Wade as the next kind of big body, and then after that, you do kind of start leaning towards DeAndre Hunter, Max Strus. Like you have a significant size drop off once you get past your main 2 front court guys. So when you talk about an Indiana Pacers team that sneakily was a top 10 defense all year, and you pair that with their positional flexibility, and then you pair that with the lack of positional depth beyond their 2 main guys at the big man spot who did have a chink in their armor in terms of the injury to Evan Mobley, you have this perfect recipe of like, let's just wear them out. And that is an element of it as well.
That's exactly what they did. They wore them out the whole series. But
here's the thing that I have the question for, TV, and that's where it gets tricky, and this is where we'll transition to our question about the Cleveland Cavaliers off-season decisions, right? last season, the biggest question against the Orlando Magic was, damn, are y'all, even the year before, or even the year prior?
The year prior was when they lost to the Knicks in the first round.
Right. So let's go. So let's do both then, because I think both actually count for the same thing. Because we had the exact same conversation for both series. For the Knicks series 2 years ago, and for the Orlando Magic series last season, the question was around whether or not this team was physical enough to compete with some of these teams in the Eastern Conference that have a lot of either a lot of forward depth, a la the Orlando Magic, who play through their forwards, and Paolo Banchero and Franz Wagner, who both are downhill, or the physical nature of that version of the New York Knicks, right? They adjust that, and it seems like they get, significant depth. They kind of take away from the physicality by creating more three-point opportunities to slow the game down. Now it seems like their issue becomes against these up-tempo teams of being, and their size still being a factor, still being an issue in terms of depth behind Evan Mobley and Jared Allen. It seems like the up-tempo and size is still an issue for this Cleveland Cavaliers team. Even now, this is 3 years back to back to back where the chink in the armor is still built around their roster construction. There is still a big question mark around the philosophical nature of this Cleveland Cavaliers team in terms of how they're built. Whether you're a physical team or a run and gun team, this team just does not seem to have the competitive fervor to hang with these type of squads. And I hate to say it, but most of the best teams in the East are built like this. So the question now lies, what do? What can they do? Or should they not do anything and just kind of rest on the laurels that an injured series is an injured series, and like Donovan Mitchell said, we'll be back? Is it just that simple?
I want to say there's definitely an out. There's definitely they have the reasoning as to if they want to run it back. 64 win season. They got the coach of the year in Kenny Atkinson. Historically great offensive season. Historically great shooting season, by the way.
Right.
I do think that there is a world where they just go back and run it back just because of how good it was, how good the regular season was, and they can make the argument. Look, if we get healthy, we can be able to make this deep playoff run. Okay. But I have my question still with the backcourt of this team. The defensive intensity, the defensive acumen is just not there. And I hate to say this because I do like this guy as a player. I just don't think that these last three playoff series have been very kind to him. Jared Allen, I just don't think has because I see the vision, because you see it work with Chet and Isaiah Hartenstein. You've seen it work in the past with Jared Jackson and Steven Adams in the past. Jared Allen is just not that much of a physical threat. I'm sorry.
Yeah,
he's a good lob threat. He's a good shot blocker. But he's just not at that level to be banging down with. It's weird because you would think that he would impose his physical presence against Miles Turner, who's more of a finesse big compared to a stronger big. But he still was, I think, was more the aggressive guy in this series than Jared Allen. So as much as how good Jared Allen as a player, he's not the. And I think this two big lineup can work. It just shows that 3 years is a long time to see this now. And it's not like he's been one of those guys where we can make the excuse that he's an injury. He just hasn't been as effective. And he has good regular seasons. He has borderline all-star caliber regular seasons. It's just whenever it comes to the playoffs, I hate to take the words out of his mouth there, but the lights have been too bright. I don't want to take the words from his mouth, but it's the fact that it's happened 3 years straight gives me reason for caution, and maybe opens up the opportunity to potentially there's a trade. I'm more willing to give maybe Darius Garland another chance. I just think, again, you're getting to that point, just like we're getting to that point where maybe the injury issues are maybe too hard to overcome, but I'm willing to give him another chance. But if there's anyone that needs to maybe that to be on the chopping block more than anything, it's Jared Allen. And maybe that means trading him for a legit 4-man, maybe someone that can a bit of size, I could compete with those in the East, and maybe move Evan Mobley to the 5, or maybe just even just a more physical center in general. So I think in a world, yes, you can make the argument that the Cavs should run it back. They have the roster to do so. Now they actually added the depth. But we're at this point now that something does need to change in terms of the overall philosophy of this team. And the one guy that you can actually make poke holes at is Jared Allen, because out of all the guys that you can make the injury excuses for, or like any of the other stuff, he's been on the floor and he just hasn't produced.
Yeah, it's funny that you brought him up because he was literally, when I went to the Cavs cap sheet, I was like, who could they even move? What could they
He's a
even
good
do
contract.
to
It's an
improve
easy
this team?
contract to move. It's an easy contract to move.
He was the first guy that comes to mind, especially because center depth around the league is kind of sketchy when you look at the Lakers, when you look at the New Orleans Pelicans, right? There's a couple of teams that you could point out. Obviously, even going back to the Brooklyn Nets could be an interesting situation because they have their own situation with Nicholas Claxton. Obviously, I don't think they would trade for Jared Allen, but I do think they have a center question nonetheless. There's a couple of teams around the league that I do definitely think have to take a strong look at center. And Jared Allen has a favorable contract, as you mentioned. Now, there is a little bit of an insane balloon payment on the back end of that because after 2026, he jumps up to 28 mil, then 30 mil, then 32 mil before he finally comes off the books in 28-29. So there is a little bit of a jump there. So if you want to trade for him, it's probably now, while when he comes on your initial cap, he's going to be hitting for 20 M's next season. So if there was any year to trade for him, it'd be right now. I think the Cleveland Cavaliers are in a situation where they have to look at Jared Allen and move him with the intention of being able to get one of two things, and preferably this offseason, there's two different things I think they need to try to get. The first one, I believe, is a stretch four. I think we need to come to the conclusion that Evan Mobley has to be a full-time center. I understand what it is that they want to do with the double big lineup. I also understand that we can't give KG and can't give Anthony Davis comps and not understand what they both thrive at within their position when they both were at the peak of their powers, right? We've understood for years, capital Y, years, that Anthony Davis thrives best at the center position, regardless of what his preferences are, right? Kevin Garnett, although can be classified as a power forward in some senses, played best when he was small ball 5 for the Boston Celtics. Period point blank. Evan Mobley is in a very similar mold, and with Evan Mobley not necessarily stretching the floor, only taking about 3-point attempts per game this season, which is an increase, but still relatively low for a 4-man in today's league. Once you get past their initial 1, 2, 3, the stretchability of this offense, which the Avalanche was built off of shooting the ball at a high clip, when they have their main go-to lineup double big, they take that 3-point shooting effectiveness away down from 5 out to 3, and their dynamic significantly changes if they're not crashing the glass at a high rate. Evan Mobley at the 5 is something they eventually have to lean into, and I don't think they can do that in comfort without moving on from Jared Allen. The second thing is they need an off-the-bench offensive initiator. I'm talking about offensive initiator from the perspective of actually creating baskets. I love Ty Jerome. He falls into the good old school of the Tyus Jones backup point guard, in terms of keeping offenses rolling, being able to function as a guy who can put people in the right spots and make good decisions. He's not an offensive creator from a shot generation standpoint. Nor is Max Strus, kind of what Karis LeVert was for this team, right? And ironically, he would have been very interesting in a series like this one where Darius Garland was hobbled. They need to maybe look at a guy. I don't know if they'll move on him from him, but eventually they have to take a look at him. Is the Utah Jazz with Jordan Clarkson. Would be an interesting guy, or someone in that mold. Jordan Clarkson or the return of Colin Sexton would be an interesting boat to kind of flow with in terms of getting another guy off the bench to generate actual offense. After Darius Garland, after Donovan Mitchell, name the next best shot generator on the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Yeah, it's tough to find right now. And they tried doing that. Well, they tried giving Jerome the keys in the series, and it did not work out. Probably one of the more disappointing guys in the playoffs, honestly, from like when you look at like how great his regular season was. This man came third place in Sixth Man of the Year voting and was basically unplayable in that final game of the playoffs. So absolutely tough. But yeah, again, I guess like what we're trying to say here is like there's a world where they don't make a move, but at the same time, if they're really serious about being title contenders, they have a 3-year sample size at least with someone like Jared Allen, and you can see how this like system works in the playoffs. There's definitely like a change needs to be made, and I think that now that the front office has seen like how far this team can go, they could honestly come to the conclusion that this team has peaked at this point, and maybe they need to start to move things around if they really want to stay competitive in the East. Because honestly, now with what's happening with the Celtics, there's a big opportunity in the East for next year.
Yeah.
So maybe they want to make a move to see if they can take advantage of that. But yeah, let us know down below what you guys think. What should the Cavs do next? Jay, speaking of the Celtics, has not been a good week for the Celtics. Not at all. Because, yes, they were down 3-1. I mean, they're down 3-2 right now in the series. Great bounce back game for the Celtics in the last game. The 3-point shot was falling. Luke Cornett freaking took over the fourth quarter. Shout out to Luke Cornett. But besides that, but obviously the big story from this week, Jason Tatum fully ruptures as a series. This is not like an Achilles tear, this is a ruptured Achilles, Jay. It was a clean break.
Yeah.
That's how bad it was. Like, this man was screaming in pain. This guy needed a freaking wheelchair. He's going to be out for, of course, the remainder of this playoffs, obviously. And for a good chance, he's going to be out for next year.
Yeah.
So, yes, the Knicks are 3-2 up. We'll talk about the series pretty quickly before we move on to what's next for the Celtics. But, Jay, the Knicks already have outplayed them through a lot of this series, especially in the fourth quarters. But now with Jason Tatum, it feels like it's impossible, but at the same time, they did get the win here. So, I think, I guess I'll give my thoughts here really quick. The Knicks need to win Game 6. Because you don't want to be in a situation. I mean, I think it's good that they kind of played with their food in Game 5, so it kind of woke them up already. Because now they have 2 more chances. You don't want to mess up that Game 6. This is a game that is honestly just as much of a much win as it is going to be in Game 7. So Knicks have, especially like late in games, they've been absolutely outplaying the Celtics. Jalen Brunson has been one of the best players in the playoffs. I would honestly agree with you if you said he's been the MVP of the playoffs so far. He's been that good. But they need to close it out. They've been great. Obviously, they're starting 5 compared to last year. No injuries whatsoever. Fingers crossed this continues to happen.
Yeah.
But they've been outplaying the Celtics. I'm hoping they close it out in Game 6. Jay, your thoughts quickly on the series?
Hey, man, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and pray that they just wanted to get it done at the crib. Because other than that, obviously, Game 5 was not a good representation of what they've been all season, and definitely not in these playoffs specifically. It's one of those things where you do have to wonder with the Boston Celtics. The law of averages has shown up in 2 different games for them in terms of when they're hitting the 3 ball, they are really hitting it at a high clip, right? And we know that when they're dangerous from beyond the arc, they are one of those teams that obviously anybody would be concerned about on a regular basis. And for this team, they shot a very good percentage, 45% on threes on nearly 50 attempts. That's
I mean, both games they shot like 20+ threes, which is insane. But if that's what's going to take to win the series, that's going to be tough to kind of replicate.
And that's kind of the thing, again, that comes down to the law of averages for Boston. They're in a situation kind of similar to the old James Harden, Houston Rocket teams in terms of shot generation, where you kind of wonder if that live and die by the 3 mentality is one of those things that in a series like this one has really costed them. You wonder if that play style alone has been the thing that really hurt them in the early portion. But then you also look at it and say, well, they were up by 20 multiple times. So it simply came down to finishing. But again, I think this is a series where at the end of the day, I mean, before Jason Tatum went out in Game 5, let's talk about the fact that dude was torching before he absolutely got taken out.
He was torching the first 3 quarters. I was getting worried a bit in the fourth quarter because it was kind of showing the same thing, but he was killing them. He was killing them, especially those first 3 quarters was insane.
Absolute tough shot maker. Like in a real way. I mean, was pulling up from absolute everywhere, was playing absolutely out of his mind through the first 3 quarters before going down with injury, like you said. So now to not have that takeover guy is going to be really tricky because Jaylen Brown has been sketchy all postseason. And I say that definitively. That is not something that, like, I don't think the stats alone say that. Check the tape. Jaylen Brown has felt very quiet throughout this entire postseason, which is interesting for a guy that once upon a time was finals MVP. But I think that this is a series for them that I feel like the Knicks have in the bag. The question just now is, are they going to take up the challenge of finally getting it done at MSG? Like I said, I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt and say that they just wanted to get it done at the crib. But that, like you said, the urgency to win Game 6 is huge because if this goes back to Boston with the law of averages, 1 game to decide it all, who knows? All they got to do is get hot for 1 more game. And at that point, hey, you could see yourself going back home as the team that was up,
in a really good situation with Jason Tatum being down up 3-2 and you fold it. And we're going to have a bigger conversation about that than the one where we're talking about the Boston Celtics having to revamp this summer. Like, that's crazy that the Knicks could be the team on the hot seat if one more game goes the wrong way.
No, 100%. And I mean, they've been good. And I think that like with Jalen Brunson at the helm, that he's gonna be able to get his troops like ready for Game 6 and understand like the kind of the magnitude of it all. Because even like without Jason Tatum, yes, they're missing his defensive presence. I think now that we're seeing like a Jason Tatum less Boston Celtics, you understand that he is a big chunk of their offense. He plays so well on the defensive end in terms of like guarding the perimeter now. He's improved so much and just opening up the floor for the rest of the team. That's why Jaylen Brown is considered one of the best Robins in the league and why like you get so many open opportunities for like a Derek White, Payne Pritchard, all them guys. So I want to just say like Jason Tatum's a big part of this team and like them like missing him probably means they're no longer a title contender, which is unfortunate. But the Knicks again, they do have to pull through in Game 6, which is interesting. But Jay, this is the interesting part because we already knew going into the offseason, the Celtics are going to have to make moves no matter what. We looked at their freaking payroll before the episode started.
Ooh.
So many $30 million contracts on the same team. Jay, it's pretty bad. It's pretty bad. And just to note too, Kristaps Porzingis has been horrible this playoffs.
Yes.
I know there's been like a sickness he's been like suffering since March. Obviously, we have to take that into account. But Jay, he's been playing like I think like averaging less than 15 minutes a night for the Celtics in the playoffs so far. It's bad. So you have Jason Tatum now no longer. We have to see for at least for next season there's going to be no Jason Tatum, and they know they still want to compete because they have so much talent on their roster.
Yeah.
Like who stays and who goes?
Okay.
So I had to mull over this one pretty heavy, and it's literally just because their books, as TV noted, are nasty.
Jason Tatum, who will probably be on the shelf all of next season, is owed $54 million.
They won't get They probably will get an exception. But I don't think it counts towards the cap, right? The exception or whatever it is.
Either way, they're gonna get an exception, and if they do, it's only gonna be a 30% probably marker for what he actually is getting. So they're still only gonna get a functionality of maybe like $20 million within that, which is still almost the equivalent to paying like the mid-level exception to someone. That's like Alex Caruso's deal right now. Like,
right.
That's still a whole dude they are legitimately paying for, as opposed to like it being an exemption that's really going to like. I mean, it's an exemption that might give them some real functionality, maybe. But TV, in reality, this is not good for them. They are in a situation where, and we have to remember, reports say that Al Horford wants a contract extension because he is an unrestricted free agent. He wants a contract extension. If I'm Boston, I don't know how I give it to him unless he wants it for the low ski. Past him, do you let Lou Cornett come off of your books and maybe restructure it? Maybe. Torrey Craig, you probably let walk. But Derek White still owed 28 M's. You don't move him. Peyton Pritchard is like on one of the most respectable contracts in the league right now. So you obviously got to kind of keep him. Plus, you can't really aggregate him because his contract's too low. Plus, with them being in the second apron. I hate to say this, bro. Boston Celtics fans probably have known this all year. But your only two trade chips are an expiring contract for Kristaps Porzingis, which unless they view him the same way that the Clippers viewed Ben Simmons, as just like a guy to come off the books later on, he's not going to be a contributor for anybody. So the trade value of him is significantly low right now. And the only other guy that you can trade, that you at least think you would trade, probably Drew Holiday again.
Which, again, he's not like probably, I'm not saying he's bad, but
he ain't having the strongest postseason either.
I was going to say, this is like definitely the worst he's looked in years.
Yeah. So your two best trade chips, realistically, that don't involve moving off of JT or JB, aren't giving the best auditions to possibly be moved for significant value. So this is going to be a really interesting summer, paired with the fact that people kind of forget this because this is the business side of basketball, but this team is up for sale, by the way. So this team understands that it's getting expensive.
That ownership is slick. Ownership is slick. Being able to say, we're signing 6 guys to $30+ million per year contracts. And then say, you know what? We're up for sale.
Hey.
They think they're being slick. And the
Come
thing is, Jay,
on.
we talked about this when they put them up for sale. We're like,
Uh-huh.
it's like, okay, so you want to give these contracts now, and then we're like, okay, now we want to wipe our hands clean. Okay,
Yeah.
we see you, Celtics. We see you, Celtics.
Yeah, man, it's one of those things that doesn't get discussed about because it's the business side of basketball, but it goes to further show you that even from the front office and beyond perspective, they understand how like unattainable it is to keep this roster as currently constructed, right? So this is going to be a really tough summer for them because like you mentioned, they were gonna have to do something regardless. It's kind of similar to the Minnesota Timberwolves situation in a way with Karl
It's
Anthony
worse.
Towns,
It's worse.
but it's worse
Yeah.
because unlike Karl Anthony Towns, who's still a little bit younger, high commodity, has that stretch four ability that you can kind of place in different kind of roster construction. Drew Holiday and Al Horford and Kristaps Porzingis all bring a very particular skill, and all are not playing their best version of basketball right now to display that skill.
I would say that Al Horford has been like the most effective out of the three of them, which is crazy to think. And he's
Yeah, but-
you're probably the best value for money at this point, which is insane for a 38-year-old.
I was going to say, he's going to be going into his age 39 season as a guy that is looking for not a contract, like not a 1 year re-up. He's looking for a contract extension. So this is a guy who wants bare minimum a 1-1 with a player option. I'm very interested to see who's willing to give it to him. I'm very interested to see what Al Horford is actually going to command in the open market. And I'm not going to lie to you, bro. I'll do some poking around and see what it looks like. But the trade market for Kristaps Porzingis can't be that great. So their front court situation across the board is not looking very stable right now. When you pair the fact that outside of those two guys, Neemias Queta, not really getting burned. Luke Cornett, a guy who is going to come off of their books. They probably will try to sign for the low ski, but you bring him back. And then Xavier Tillman's the other guy, and he's been like played out of the rotation after last year.
Yes.
He kind of showed real good strides of maybe being like an Al Horford replacement.
Oh yeah, no, he's been outplayed by Neemias Queta and Luke Cornett this year.
Which is kind of nasty because I don't necessarily know if either one of them would get significant minutes on any other basketball team but the Boston Celtics right now.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a lot of big decisions to make, and we knew that when they announced the contract extension of Derek White. We knew this when they wanted to bring back Kristaps Porzingis on a 2-year deal, like however much it is. We're like, oh, so you're just gonna people were like, okay, so you're gonna pay it, and then we saw them like go for it the next time, like, oh, so you don't actually want to pay it. So that's good. It's definitely an interesting situation because they say they still want to be competitive too, and. This team will be, if you bring this team back healthy for next year, they will be competitive to a certain extent. There's only so much a Jaylen Brown-led team could do for you when you go into a regular season and playoffs. So they want to make sure they want to have like another, a legitimate third star at this point if they really want to stay competitive, even in a non-Jason Tatum year. So where are you going to find a home for both Jrue Holiday and Kristaps Porzingis? It's going to be very tough. And we're going to probably go more to their situation in the offseason, especially when you can hear maybe some names that they want to trade for, maybe some guys that we can't think about right now that are on the table that become available. So it's definitely going to be interesting. But either way, the Celtics are a clear example of like what the new NBA is, especially when it comes to money-wise. It's hard to maintain championship-level teams, bro. We've seen that now with the Denver Nuggets, where they kind of lose players each and every year. And this is now the Celtics start to kind of like go through that same struggle.
Yeah, I think that the Celtics are in a really interesting situation because very similar to the Suns, very similar to the Nuggets, very similar to Minnesota of last year. Their books are in a weird place where they are now forced to make a decision. This is one of the bigger interesting things about the second apron. Man, that's a whole podcast by itself when you pair what also just happened with the lottery odds, right? But the second apron has created a balance of power problem where no team can truly create a dynasty now and has now actually created an NBA that follows a very similar model to the NFL. The structure of getting the cornerstone rookie prospect that has a minimum 5, maximum 8-year long stay with that main franchise based off of their initial cheap
contract and, of course, the player, the
The rookie
rookie
extension.
extension.
Yeah.
But more particularly, that initial 5 years is the window in which that team could be the most successful in terms of going after star talent, making high-level acquisitions, and making more win-now moves. It's an interesting philosophy for the NBA to go with, given the fact that the NBA has always kind of been built off and thrived within dynasties in a way that the NFL has never actually seen consistency out of. The model has now created itself as now the standard of the NBA, of drafting well being important, the focus of being able to build around a lead prospect being that much more of a lead bulletin point for some of these starter franchises, right? And we've talked about this a lot, even dating back to last year. The focus around depth is so much more important because the idea of just giving dudes 30, 40. Jason Tatum in a couple of seasons is going to be making $70 million for a singular season. The fact that there are contracts that are and will continue to look like that makes it where your ability to build around these guys, player development, and being able to grab dudes kind of from bottom of the barrel, the hidden gems, if you will. It's a new philosophy around basketball that we've never really seen front and center like this before. We've always seen, comeback player of the year type guys and those dudes who were surprise standouts in their sophomore and quote unquote third season before really popping off in their, to the back part of their prime or the early portion of their prime. But now, like, these things are now the forefront of how you build a basketball team. It's not just strictly getting the star anymore, because the star we might be in a league where the star might be the easy part. It's the building around the star that's now become the more difficult function.
Yeah.
And once upon a time, getting the star was the hardest part of building a franchise up. Now, that's just like the ice, and I don't want to say the icing on the cake. It's still a difficult thing to do, of course, but it doesn't guarantee you anything. We've seen this with the Phoenix Suns multiple seasons now. We've seen this with a handful of rosters multiple seasons now, that simply just getting the guy isn't enough.
And I think, like, this is my final point before we do move on to the final series.
Yeah.
We're not going to see those, like, empty the cabinet sort of trades anymore of draft picks. Never. Even for someone, like, who might be available. I'm not saying that he's going to be available, who might be available in Giannis Antetokounmpo. Even someone, a top 3 player, top 2 player in basketball will not require a dumping of the cabinet. Because now, like you mentioned, draft picks are a lot more valuable. You're going to want to have those cheap contracts and try to develop them under your system, because those are guys are going to be the most important. These are the guys you want to have in your system, that you want to be as your 4, 5, 6, 7 guys in your rotation to fill up, because you're going to have to start. Like you mentioned, it starts like some teams will be like, oh, you want to start and you want to give us some more picks? We'll give you this. And then you have to try and deal with this now.
Yeah.
We're going to get into that point. And those guys are going to be just as important. So we're going into uncharted territory soon, Jay. And then at some point we're going to be like hitting some trades where it's like, man, that's all it took to get a player, maybe like Giannis Antetokounmpo, like a Shai Gilgeous-Alexander down the line. But you're like, bro, the cap situation is going to be too tough to deal with. So we're going to be heading into those, and we'll probably discuss this more in the offseason, but we're heading like more into those deep waters sooner rather than later. So it's definitely going to be interesting. Team building as a concept going forward too is going to be definitely interesting going forward. This is, by the way, also there might be teams like maybe like potentially like going back in the draft, like trading back just so they don't have to pay as much for like first round picks and stuff like that. So definitely something to be looking at. Yeah. Jade, third series, and I think this series, this one won't take long because we knew this was going to be done the minute Steph Curry left the second quarter of Game 1. Yeah. The Minnesota Timberwolves absolutely dominate the Golden State Warriors 4-1 in the series. I want to say great Anthony Edwards series. I will also say great Julius Randle series, Jay. Great Julius Randle playoffs. I think this is like we're gonna give our flowers to Julius Randle right now. Jay, he's not had a bad playoffs at all. This has probably been like the most like excited, the most happy I've seen like play Julius Randle. He's like the perfect second option to Anthony Edwards right now, who either starts off the game slow or has his little lows as like the number 1 guy. But Julius Randle just steadies the ship, continues to attack the paint, go for the offensive rebound. He's been so key in this series. And for someone who people thought was like, oh, there's going to be a bad fit next to Gobert, this and that, he has been literally the perfect second option for the Timberwolves. I just want to give a space for me, maybe for you. Julius Randle's been awesome this entire playoffs.
Most definitely. We have to give him his flowers, especially because he's the butt of a lot of jokes on this podcast in past years and past seasons in terms of us talking about what he's been able to not do or what he's done and what he hasn't done in the postseason. I think the biggest thing is that he's added a secondary option as a ball handler on the perimeter that can also create for himself. We've mentioned this in the past about what they need around Anthony Edwards, and although Karl-Anthony Towns is a big-time stretch four and was really huge for them last season, Naz Reid gives them a lot, at least 80% of a lot of things that Karl-Anthony Towns gave him last season as a big man at that position. But the one thing he didn't give them is another offensive generator at the top of the key or on the wing as a guy who can step into the post, back his man down, hit fall-away jumpers, as a guy who can take it from the wing, off the dribble, baseline drive, get to the line, right? These different operations that can kind of slow the game down in a way that says, Ant, take a second, step at the top of the key, watch from the side. I'm going to create. I'm gonna generate, and if I kick out, I know you're one of the best 3-point shooters in the league this season. Or if I need to get to the line, this buys you rest, right? It's one of those things that we've seen this a lot of times with a lot of other heliocentric superstars. Luka Doncic with the Dallas Mavericks once upon a time, James Harden once upon a time, where they run into this issue of not having another secondary generator, and they tried to get it in different iterations, right? In the past, Kyrie Irving next to Luka Doncic, Russell Westbrook next to James Harden once upon a time, of getting another guy who can create shots for himself to almost give the lead guy a break in a sense. We've seen this with LeBron James, with why they've tried to emphasize so much of running offense through Austin Reeves this past season, right? It's this idea of your lead guy is your lead guy, but damn, do he gotta score or initiate every single play? And it becomes very tough, and it was one of the hardest things that hurt them last season. It was one of the reasons why Jaden McDaniels' breakout as a scorer last postseason was so eye-opening for them, because it was like, wait a minute, they have another guy who can kind of start to generate offense for himself, that started to grow for himself, and it created this thing where it said, wait a minute, the Timberwolves now have options, because Naw has been shooting the 3-ball at a high clip. Obviously, we know him more for what he does defensively on the perimeter, but he's been shooting 3-ball at a high clip. Jaden McDaniels in the perimeter as a guy who's been much better at the mid-range spot this season, and kind of dating back to his postseason run, is somebody who can kind of get hot here and there. Julius Randle has just now usurped those two guys as the guy that you know you can trust to do that. Right? Versus you kind of having to hope that those two guys can step up here and there. Julius Randle has now been handed the baton for like, yo, this is the function you play, is giving us something else next to Ant to give us a boost in terms of not just initiating offense, but creating real opportunity for Ant to take a step back and not have to create everything. Because we know, we talked about this a lot last postseason, Ant is a guy where when he starts rolling, sometimes he can get in his own way, moving too fast, very, very bonehead turnovers, right? In terms of just kind of playing almost out of body because it's all happening at one time. And we used to mention Mike
Conley. He plays like a lot in the
being,
flow state. He plays a lot in the flow state.
Very much a flow state, to the point that we mentioned a lot last season, Mike Conley being this calming force at the point guard position, right? Julius Randle now presents that same function, but as a guy who can actually take the shot distribution away, as opposed to Mike Conley, who kind of just slows Ant down, but doesn't give him another option to go to.
Yeah.
And that's been huge during this postseason, because Julius Randle is not only cleaning up his image as a postseason performer, but he's also playing up towards the Timberwolves, being in a situation where now we understand exactly what it is that Ant needs around him. And that's something that, as Ant's development has ebbed and flowed, you kind of weren't sure what he needed. You know, you still kind of weren't sure what he needed, because he's so spectacular as a finisher around the rim. But then this past season, he's developed as a 3-point shooter, and you're like, okay, wait, so he can do it all. He's a big time defender on the perimeter when you need a stop or you need a block shot. So he's good on that side. So he's an excellent two-way player. So it's like, what can't Ant do, and what do we do to build around him that way? You see that it's, yes, he can do all those things, but you're not going to win a championship if he has to do all of those things, right? And I think that they've now found a blueprint to build around him that works. Julius Randle, in terms of giving an extension, becomes the next question.
That's an off-season problem. That's an off-season problem for the Minnesota Timberwolves. But man, 24 points per game, 6 rebounds, 6 assists, 50% from the field, 62% true shooting, almost 90% from the free throw line, Jay. He has just been absolutely incredible. Probably the most surprising player to playoffs in terms of a good way. And Jay, even as two guys who kind of threw shot to Julius Randle as throughout his tenure with the New York Knicks, even he's having his eat crow right now, bro. We're all eating crow from Julius Randle, and I'm super glad to see that. He's been absolutely fantastic, especially in the series versus the Warriors. Man, just absolutely took over. Speaking of the Warriors, Jay, we talked about how this is probably going to be their last dance. They had maybe 1 or 2 years left. Jimmy Butler, I know he was dealing with an injury, but that game 4 and 5 was kind of nasty. Only 9 shots in game 4, 11 shots in game 5. Jay, I don't know if it was just me. It felt like I was watching a Jonathan Kuminga showcase in these final 2 games.
I think, like everybody knows, Jonathan Kuminga's not going back. I don't care.
That's what it felt like a showcase to me, where it's like, oh, let's give him the minutes, show them that, oh, I know we benched him, but he's still a really talented player.
Yeah.
And so, and then it's so surprised to me right after the series finished that a report came out saying that the Warriors and Jonathan Kuminga are going to be working on a sign trade. I'm like, oh, okay. This was you probably had the feeling you guys were going to lose. I mean, when Steph Curry's on the court, Draymond Green just turns to a completely different person. For some reason, he just doesn't want to play basketball when there's no Steph Curry. Jimmy Butler just was not the aggressive playoff Jimmy that we were hoping for. And Jonathan Kuminga played well, but obviously that wasn't going to lead to winning basketball. So now the sign trade option is available to them. I guess, Jay, the only thing I have to ask you in terms of the Golden State Warriors, is there a move to make? Should they mess with the Jimmy, Draymond, Steph core? Do they run it back? And I guess this is more of an offseason question, what they can get for Jonathan Kuminga, or do you just think that they just have to just work on the perimeter, on the outside of those top 3 guys that they have?
I mean, the biggest question, I think, is what can they get for Jonathan Kuminga? Because the number they agreed to is also going to determine what the value of a sign and trade looks like. They're going to try to be aiming for some kind of depth in a trade like this because they are definitely not going to get a talent for talent exchange. But I think the biggest thing is
at this point, getting some depth for this team.
I mean, obviously, the biggest thing is they point guard. Point guard is going to always be a question because Brandon Podziemski, as a guy coming off the bench, I don't think is a lead initiator in any way. Not even just in terms of scoring, but I just don't think he's an initiator. He is a connector to me. And he showed a lot of that this season after last year kind of being a real effective off the bench. He kind of had his Ty Jerome season last year. And I feel like this season was more of a reflection of the player he actually is, which is a guy who still is the straw that stirs the drink, but on a second unit. Buddy Hield is signed long-term for this team. I do think this is finally the season where they let Kevon Looney walk. I know that's been in conversations the last 2 seasons or something like that, but I feel like this is a year where they do probably let him actually walk for real. I think that they maybe do actually let Gary Payton II walk for real this time. As well, instead of maybe trying to trade and then reacquire or waive and then reacquire. I think he's a dude that actually comes off the books. I ain't gonna front, dude. This team has to look at this next 2-year window is exactly that. They lined Jimmy Butler's extension up with the last 2 seasons of Steph Curry and Draymond Green for a reason. So whether Warriors fans like it or don't like it, the window is exactly the window they've set. And by saying that they're going to engage in a sign and trade with Jonathan Kuminga is not just a reflection of what they haven't prepared for in terms of building up youthful talent like a Jonathan Kuminga or even a Moses Moody, who I think hasn't played enough for this Warriors team, if I'm being real. I think it's also a reflection of the fact that they have now committed to one timeline, being this one, which is desperately important because the 2 timeline thing was cute when it was working. But when it doesn't, they've crashed and burned each time. They've had crash and burn kinds of seasons when it wasn't working. Now, when it worked, what a freaking championship, right? But it was kind of in spite of the double timeline at the time as well. So I think by their contracts being set up the way they are, the fact that they're willing to engage in a sign and trade with Jonathan Kuminga, things of that nature, probably letting Kevon Looney walk, this is a commitment to making the next 2 years the best 2 years possible that they can with the contracts they have. The Warriors are an interesting spot. I don't know how they're getting flowed out for Giannis Antetokounmpo trade conversations. I've seen articles for
way.
that.
There's
no way in the world, and I don't know who in Milwaukee would actually consider it, even if Jonathan Kuminga was at the forefront of that kind of trade. But it'll be interesting to see what a Jonathan Kuminga return is, because at the end of the day, that's their only chess move, in my personal opinion.
Yeah, you can attach Moses Moody to that too, because yes, they want him to be part of this long-term plan, but this guy was unplayable in the second round. This guy could not get anything going. But yeah, no, you're 100% right. The Golden State Warriors commit to this 2 years. They're gonna try to make these 2 years the best as possible. The only problem is the rest of the West is getting better. So as much as you want to make the most of these 2 years, you're gonna see the Spurs jump up like crazy. You're gonna see teams like the Houston Rockets make some moves. You're gonna see a bunch of these young teams feel like they're lapping them and overtaking them. And you kind of have to just ride it out and just hope that like things fall your way at this point. So it's basically the Warriors have made their bed and they have to lay in it. And whatever happens, happens, and just try to make the most of these last 2 years. But yeah, this has been a rough series for them for sure. Like, it's really unfortunate the way like how things like kind of played out, especially Steph Curry not being there, not being able to finish out the series. But at the same time, you know, we know what the next steps are. So it's gonna be interesting to see what they get for Jonathan Kuminga. Let's see what moves they have going next. Time to move on to the next topic of the show. And we're going to be talking about the NBA Draft Lottery, Jay. By the way, any thoughts on those playoff series? Let us know down below. Jay, this NBA Draft Lottery, though. What is there to say? What happened? Because I know we did our mock draft lottery I think a week ago.
Mm-hmm.
And Jay, we thought this was a joke. We thought that this, like, what was happening here was, like, you know, kind of like what the most ridiculous thing possible is. Jay, we said that one of the worst scenarios is the Mavericks getting the number one pick. I didn't think it was actually going to happen, but this is now the reality we're living in. Now it's Mavericks move up to number 1, which we predicted, by the way. The Sixers move up to number 3, which we predicted right away. But who would have thought that also the freaking San Antonio Spurs, the 3rd year in a row, make it to the top 4 of the lottery. The 3rd year in a row. And now they have the 2nd overall pick. All the tanking teams, you're thinking the Pelicans, you're thinking the Wizards, you're thinking the Hornets, you're thinking the Jazz, all of them moved down at least 3 spots, which is insane. The Hornets obviously close out the top 4 with the 4th overall pick. But Jay, this draft lottery got everyone up in arms. Nico Harrison, you have been revived from the depths of NBA purgatory. You have been revived and have a chance to have Cooper Flag after doing Luka so dirty. I gave my thoughts on TikTok. What are your thoughts? I was absolutely like losing my mind when this was happening.
So the first thing I thought was, obviously, we made the joke at the top of the podcast, but mock draft simulator predicts all, because I saw that and I'm like, wow, not only did the Mavs get number 1, but Philly got number 3, just like our, simulation showed as well. But the next thing I thought to myself was, does this make, as a Mavericks fan, this is an interesting question to ask the chat later on, but like, as a Mavericks fan, do you hate Nico Harrison more or less now? Right? Because in a sense, the way you could structure this, given the way everything played out, and there's no way Nico could have pinpointed all of this for what it was. I refuse to give him the credit in this kind of situation. But you essentially traded Luka Doncic to get Anthony Davis and Cooper Flag, right? And so you have to ask yourself in a weird way, like, are you cool with that? How are you supposed to feel? Now, TV, we talked about this last pod. As vindicated as Nico Harrison should feel coming out of this situation, I think the most confused people out of all of this is not just regular NBA fans, but Mavericks fans should be confused, because a lot of them were ready to burn their jerseys after Luka was moved. Let's be honest, right? And now you have to ask yourself, like,
am I coming back? Like, how much of I'm a believer in Nico moving forward after seeing this happen? What are your feelings on Cooper Flag, who you probably never thought even had a close to an iota of a reality of landing on your team? I don't know, man. The first thing I thought when it came to this whole thing was like, what do you do as a Mavericks team or a Mavericks fan specifically when you look at your team and you say, damn, it's not as bad as it looked in the beginning, but I don't know if I don't know where I'm supposed to stand on this. Like, am I supposed to believe in what's actually percolating right now, or am I tripping?
Well, the way I see it, of course I can't speak for Mavs fans.
Of course,
the way I
right.
see it is they lost a lot of people with the whole Nico and Harrison situation with the Luka trade of the Luka Doncic. I think what this does is kind of bring some people back in. You're not going to bring everyone back in, but you're going to bring some people back in. And at the end of the day, Jay, winning cures everything. If this happens, they win a championship or two, then whatever mad scientist plan Nico did worked. It's just funny how it's just like, and we're gonna get into this too, but potentially like a draft reform. I don't know. I think we're both on the same boat of like not to do it yet. Obviously, I think it's a bit kind of too reactionary for that, but it's the idea that a team does something so egregious, something that no one in a million years thought that would happen. And we look at Nico Harrison for the next 3 months with such a distaste, with such not hatred. Maybe some people will say hatred, but like some people will like he's become public enemy number one in the NBA, and to see him get rewarded with the number one overall pick, I think that's where a lot of the frustrations come from. Where it's like he does this, and then he's the one that gets it. Because apparently, Jay, if like this specific top three of the Mavs, Spurs, and 76ers, it was like a 0.01% chance of actually happening. And the fact that it happened is absolutely crazy. And if you listen to the Zach Lowe show and kind of just the tension around the room, Jay, you were one number away from the second pick and the first pick. The Raptors were one number away from the first pick and the third pick. That's how like close these numbers were. And the fact that like these lottery balls kind of fell to the teams that were in the high 8, 9, 10s or the low teens, it was absolutely crazy. Again, it felt like a once in a generational thing type of happen. But if I'm Dallas, obviously you're not going to bring everyone back, but this provides some hope. And to think that maybe you can have like someone who is a generational prospect who's legitimately, by the way, Jay, a perfect fit for your team.
Especially if you I find it very interesting specifically that they got number one instead of number two, because yes, number two would fit also because Dylan Harper would just be able to fill in and also play next to Kyrie Irving when he comes back next season, right? But the other side of it also is Nico specifically said when they traded Luka Doncic, defense wins championships. And of course, the high upside focus around Cooper Flag is more around his defensive capabilities than what he does offensively. Not that he's not a good offensive player, but we've always understood that Cooper fits more of a secondary, tertiary offensive option in the league when he first comes in. It was always going to be his defensive intangibles, kind of the Asor Amin Thompson effect of coming in and being like a defensive player of the year / all defensive caliber player out the gate, right? And that's kind of what he fits into the mold of, not just in terms of the philosophy that Nico Harrison apparently wants to adopt, but also his fit directly next to Anthony Davis as not only a perimeter defender, but again, another shot blocker and another rim deterrent as well. So it's a lot of interesting factors, but this is like a weird match made in heaven. And we said it last podcast. It was like it would be one of the nastiest things to happen. It also would be scary because it makes sense. And here we are, where there's a reality where now this is exactly what it's going to look like. And the question now is just going to be like, what do they do around the rest of it?
Yeah, 100%. And it's going to be super interesting because on paper, this should be like, I mean, we knew that Kyrie and Anthony Davis was going to probably be like a top 5 team in the West if healthy. Adding Cooper Flag, a healthy team there. This team could we don't know how this team's going to look, especially that Kyrie's going to probably be out till January.
Yeah.
But the possibility is there. The vision is there. But Jay, it was just like a crazy lottery overall. Obviously, the Spurs get the second overall pick. Philly stays and keeps their pick after beating the top 7 protection. But a lot of people were saying because of this draft lottery, should there be a reform? Because like I mentioned off the top of the segment, all the bad teams, all the teams that were like vying for the top spot, the Hornets, the Pelicans, the Wizards, the Utah Jazz. Jay, we've been wanting this talent in the East for so long. And I think that's a whole lot of conversation for that episode because the East talent next year, the whole switch is going to be kind of insane because with Giannis potentially on the move, Jason Tatum going to be out for a year, the switch, the talent that's going to be East versus West is going to be even more imbalanced. But that's again, a different conversation for a different episode. But people are calling for a draft reform, basically, and saying that this whole flattening of the odds, this and that, has created, like, this type of stuff shouldn't happen. That's what they're basically saying. And to a certain extent, this shouldn't have happened. It's like such like a rare chance to do it. But they voted for chaos after they voted for this, the flattening of the odds after the 2019 draft. They saw what happened with the Philadelphia 76ers and the whole trust the process movement. They want to flap the odds. And Jay, I don't know like how you feel about it, but they kind of voted for chaos. And they're kind of getting it. And they kind of have to kind of, in my opinion, they have to kind of just let this breathe and give it time. I mean, you're going to get these sort of results, but you kind of signed up for this.
I think that's a really important thing to factor in is that this is something that you've looked towards because flattening the odds was supposed to create the level of parity that said we didn't know who the top 3 teams were going to be. We didn't know who the top 4 teams were going to bank out to be, right? And it wasn't just going to be as simple as you had one of the worst records in the league. Here you are. You have a high likelihood of getting one of the top 4, top 5 players in the upcoming draft pool, right? So when you sign up for that, you automatically have to take that on the chin. Automatically have to accept that for what it is because that's what you signed up for, like you said. I also think the other factor of it too is that I think the ideology was all built around trying to anti-tank, right? It was the idea of not allowing these teams to just be bad to get top-level talent every single year, a la the Sam Hinkie days that you mentioned with the Philadelphia 76ers. And I think a lot of the teams that were in tank mode this year did not utilize their tank strategy well. Outside of the Washington Wizards, I would say, is actually the only team that I felt like just truly played their guys. But Utah, it was very blatant, very disrespectful, I felt like, in my personal opinion.
I mean, they're bad, but they, like, leaned into even being worse, which is,
They were a team that felt like they were kind of blatantly being, like, disrespectful with how bad they wanted to be. I felt like the Charlotte Hornets were a competitive team, but I felt like they're also a team that when LaMelo Ball doesn't play, and then on top of that, Brandon Miller missed significant time this year after having a really like so-so start to the beginning of the year anyway, they just kind of fell off a cliff. The Chicago Bulls, I think, were a team that at that 1.8% chance were a little bit more deserving. I'm not just saying that because I'm a Bulls fan. I'm also saying because if you want to be one of those teams that's considered at the bottom and rewarded for not tanking, the Bulls feel like one of those teams that fell into the category of a team that was truly just not good enough to be in the top 4, but deserving enough amongst the teams that were down there to vault up, if you will. If Dallas was as deserving to get number 1, obviously the Bulls were literally a coin flip away from being in Dallas's shoes. I feel like they were a team that were deserving when you also throw into the morals of the control of tanking. So it's tricky, but I think that at the end of the day, develop your damn talent. Develop your damn talent. I feel like we can flatten odds even more and different things of that nature if you want to. Evaluate and develop your damn talent at the end of the day. This is a NBA that is, bro, we are like 2 seasons away from our childhood superstars starting to avalanche in terms of hanging up the sneakers, bro. Like, we are in a world where some of the most notable players that me and you have known. I'm 26 years old. There's gonna be a lot of people unking me in the chat after this, but I'm 26 years old. There's a lot of guys that have controlled the landscape of basketball for the last 10 to 15 years of me being a locked-in fan that are no longer going to be in the league. And I hate to say it, but the kind of generational prospects that we've seen with the Steph Currys and the LeBron Jameses and the Kevin Durants,
they're not growing on trees like they were before. These are some highly talented dudes, but our number one overall pick is being compared to Andre Kirilenko, right? As his initial draft comps coming into the year. These are guys who are all-star caliber dudes that might make a couple of all-NBA teams, maybe an all-star team here and there, but maybe not dudes who are going to ground break what the next version of the league looks like. You know what I'm saying? And so where you pick at, yes, it's going to be very important, but damn, we can't skew everything. We can't skew everything, boss. It comes to a point where you got to just be able to develop guys. You got to be able to evaluate talent, and you got to be able to identify. We're in a league where depth matters more than anything. Just simply being able to get at the top of the lottery every year. We said it earlier when we were talking about some of these other teams. Just finding the guy isn't going to solve all your problems. If that were the case, Giannis and the Bucks wouldn't have got killed in round one because Giannis was easily the best player in that series.
Oh, that was gonna be like my next point. Like, you look at the teams that are left like standing, the Pacers. They got Tyrese Haliburton through trade, Pascal Siakam through trade, but the guys that they drafted, Ben Mathurin, not in the top 4. I think just barely. I think he's the only top 10 player because Miles Turner was outside the top 10. Aaron Nesmith, 17th overall pick, but they ended up trading for him. Andrew Nembhard was a second-round pick. Like, a bunch of these guys, like the way that they build, you said it, the development of talent. Like, it doesn't like, yes, getting a number 1 pick might be easier, but seeing like all this top teams, freaking the New York Knicks, they were able to like make some trades, but they also like signed like a 30th overall pick in Josh Hart. Mikal Bridges was just like a top 13 pick. Like, you can get talent from anywhere, and I think this is why like my official stance on this is that I don't think they need to like mess with the whole like draft lottery reform or anything. And I know like some people are gonna be like, oh, we can't just keep the bad teams there bad forever. Then just be better. Be like build better, develop better, focus on those aspects instead of trying to demoralize your whole franchise, your whole fan base, subjecting them to horrific basketball.
Yeah.
In order to try and say, wait, guys, this is all going to be worth it at the end. That's just not going to be the case.
Yeah.
Like, there's just so many other ways, and you can see it with teams like who were just in that position a couple years ago, like the Houston Rockets. Yes, they ended up getting Jalen Green, right? He was a top 2 pick. Jabari Smith Jr. was a top 4 pick. Are those guys the ones who are leading this team to victory? Perfect. Well, they're not. It's the freaking 16th overall pick in Alperen Sengun who's leading this team to victory. Some of the most important players. Yes, Amin Thompson was a top 5 pick, but you have Tari Eason, who was like I think was a second round or like a late first round pick. A lot of these guys, and we talked about it earlier in the podcast, man. It's like these first round picks, being able to develop them, making sure like even if you pick high in the draft, that you're able to get these guys like normal rotation minutes in your squad, and just hopefully like you just hope that these like guys end up meshing together. It doesn't just take getting like multiple first round picks to get this working. We've seen like the Rockets invest in veteran talent. We've seen the Pistons this past year invest in veteran talent to kind of get them to the next level. Yeah. I just hope that what this has shown, especially these last couple of years, is that, I mean, it's going to balance itself out eventually. I mean, these bad teams are going to get the good picks eventually, but it's never a guarantee. It's never a guarantee, and they said they did it with the odds. It's a 50-50 chance of you stay in the top 4 or you leave the top 4. Yeah. And at the end of the day, there's just too much talent in the league, basically, in my opinion. There's just too much talent in the league that there's just so many ways that you could build with these teams, and being able to like ruin your team chemistry, your team morale, your whole fan base is just not going to cut it. And I think that like a lot of teams are starting to get it. I just hope that this like kind of turns teams around, saying, yes, we're going to be bad, but we're going to try and do it to make this like at least more fun basketball. Like try to develop our actual young talent instead of just throwing these games like these last 8 weeks of the regular season, because those were absolutely awful.
Yeah, I think to piggyback off the point that you made, I think that it might not be the way we wanted to see it, but I think if the plan was to send a message to tanking teams, this is what you do. Now, again, especially if you're a fan of an Eastern Conference team, a la me and TV, you look at this top 3, you look at this top 4, and you shake your head and you say, damn, the balance of power is not very balanced right now, right? I would also say that the Eastern Conference has become very, very accustomed to mediocrity, especially at the bottom, for a very, very long time. So two things can be true at the same time. Yes, all the talent seems to be going west. I would also say that a lot of the talent within the East is not being built up. A lot of our quote unquote building up franchises are not in the East, and there's a reason for that. Why is it? Why is it that a Houston Rockets team was able to go from one of the worst teams in basketball to making 2 or 3 moves that it don't involve draft picks? Their number 3 overall pick, Reed Shepard, was not a contributor this year. They make 2 or 3 veteran-related moves, and they're a top 2 team in the Western Conference. Why is it that the Detroit Pistons, granted, yes, there were a lot of injuries across the Eastern Conference as well that probably contributed to this, but I think they still would have made the playoffs either way, maybe just not top 6. But why is it that they're able to bring in Malik Beasley, Tobias Harris, Tim Hardaway Jr. around? Jaden Ivey was already there and missed most of the year, by the way. Jalen Duren was already there. Cade Cunningham was already slowly developing into an all-star caliber talent. Why is it that once they were able to grab 3 veterans, this team all of a sudden vaulted themselves up into being, now they changed coaches as well, and I'll give them credit for that because Monty Williams was freaking terrible. But why is it that they were on the margin moves that vaulted this team from being like the worst team in basketball statistically to being a top 6 seed in the Eastern Conference? Like, it's because at the end of the day, not everything can be built strictly off of having a blue chip talent at the helm. Yes, it is a very favorable part to your rebuild. But if that is what you are reliant on, there are a lot of hit and misses in the draft because there's no science to it.
TV, actually, there's another thing that I wanted to touch on in this discussion specifically when it comes to drafting and when it comes to specifically being in that top 4. The NIL is also making it where the draft pool isn't even the same. The actual draft pool, like we have the least amount of guys committed to actually entering the NBA draft this year in a very, very long time. Guys are going back to school, whether it's the bread or just the basketball situation. I'm going to say it's mainly the bread, though, because I think we all know what's up. And guys, Cooper Flagg took an extra month to mull over the concept of going back to Duke. If that doesn't tell you something, what should? What I'm trying to say is, every single year that you go into this stuff, just thinking that you're gonna, I'm top 3, this is gonna be something that helps turn our franchise around. You never know. You never know, dude. So this concept of going 82 games, looking for a savior at the end of the year, not only is it a waste of fans' time, but you're also wasting the product. And it's a part of what has been hurting the league for a while now, is that the teams that are bad make it obvious that they're bad. The teams that they're good have gotten so good that in 3 years they can't stay good because their books are terrible.
Yeah, no, it's becoming like a really weird imbalance. And I think, like, again, hopefully, like, whatever happens in this draft lottery does change. Does change kind of the mentality over there. Even if you don't make the playoffs, like, just the idea of just, like, putting on, like, good basketball, making sure that you put fans in the seats, making sure that the development is, like, first and foremost, like, the priority is hopefully is gonna be, like, the change in just like, signing a bunch of 10-day contracts and hoping that they're gonna, like, lose enough. So, as much as people, again, don't like the flattening of the odds, they don't like the idea of this chaos, like being able to have this many teams like move up into the top 3. This is what the league agreed to, and I think even compared to the last iteration of the draft lottery pre-2019, I like this better. I honestly like this whole situation better because it does give cause to concern for those teams. Like, you can't just purposely do this like year in and year out.
Mm-hmm.
You actually got to like be competent, and I think. Yeah. And I think, like, hopefully there's a change of mentality in those teams. Yes, the talent. Yes, they're gonna need some talent, but focus on what you have in house and before really projecting going forward and hoping that's gonna end up changing things. So that's all I gotta say. Jay, any final thoughts before we close out?
No, man, NBA draft lottery is always exciting. I think now with the flattened odds, it's actually made it more interesting and has brought real light to the NBA draft as a process that needs to be considered more. If you're the Phoenix Suns of the world who don't believe in picking draft picks, you might want to start believing, brother, because this is the new wave of being able to build teams. It's not just getting a high pick, but being able to identify talent truly.
And it's one of those things now with the transition of the league where some of our older superstars, as I mentioned earlier, are going to be moving on. Yes, there are always going to be guys that come in as blue chip guys that you hope end up hitting the ground running from the day they touch down in the league. But we're in a world now where roster construction has never been more important in terms of the functionality of creating a championship squad. It's no longer just winning off of just purely being more talented. And I think this is not only going to shed a lot more light on just teams in terms of just like how they play, but it's going to shed a lot more light on some of these GMs too, bro. Because there's a lot of old souls in this space, and there's a lot of guys who have a philosophy that's built around strictly numbers or built strictly based off of eye test. And there's a lot of guys who are just strictly built off of the idea of talent wins championships because that's always the thing that kind of is like the bright light. But in my personal opinion, I think it's never been harder to be a GM. I think it's also never been harder to be on a coaching staff, whether it's player development, whether it's actual X's and O's, things of that nature. But I also think that's what makes the game more interesting now, is that guys can't just go out there, cross their arms, sign a contract here and there, and think they got a super team, right? You have to truly build a team to win championships now. And
yeah, and
it's
I think
a different element that's been slept on.
Yeah, and I guess it's like my final thought closing out of this too is that with this whole new like age of like being able to draft, being able to build your teams in this way, it's just going to be good for basketball, man. Just different play styles, different ways where you're going to be able to see different like construction of teams and see who's able to come up on top. I think overall this is just good for the game of basketball. Yes, there's going to be some years like this year where just like chaos absolutely ensues, but it's going to be few and far between. Like the bad teams are going to get theirs. Like what I'm basically going to say. It's not going to happen every single year. So yeah, crazy draft lottery, crazy result, and hopefully just like a wake up call to a lot of like those teams that seem incompetent and just try to get some competency in there for sure. That is like one of our favorite words here on the podcast. Try and get some competency in these spaces. But Jay, it's another end of a fantastic episode. Thank you guys for watching. What do you have to tell these beautiful people before we sign out?
NBA playoffs, almost to the conference finals. We are locked in. WNBA regular season about to commence. By the time the next episode comes out, or by the time this episode comes out, actually, we should already have had tip-off and a full weekend's worth of basketball around the corner from that. So by the time we have next episode, we will have a lot to kind of reflect on as early impressions of some of these WNBA teams. So I'm excited for that, as well as having some real thoughts on the conference finals that'll be coming up. So we'll have either some version of a preview or at least a reaction to game one, depending on when our next recording is and when those series actually commence, because we got a couple of potential game sevens that could happen. And beyond that, man, just like tap into the socials. We're trying to get a lot better with unique content. I've been trying to do, more walk and talk with Jay content. TV has obviously been on top of games left and right, as well as trying to create other content to add to the page. So definitely more unique content beyond just the actual podcast clips. So tap in for those. And yeah, man, the NBA draft lottery is just a benchmark in what is always an exciting offseason in the NBA. A lot of people enjoy the offseason of the NBA almost as much as the actual season itself, right? So the lottery is just the start of that. So that also means that's just the start of us creating some of the more fun content that we know is around the corner. So like I said, stay tuned in.
Yeah, 100%. We've got lots of great basketball still coming up. Obviously, the NBA draft, we're going to be following along on our way to that point. The offseason is going to be crazy. And, of course, the WNBA is, like Jay mentioned off the top of the show, starting tomorrow. So you know that the WNBA content is coming back to the pod. So going to be just a great time to be a basketball fan. Make sure you log into the Hit Your Free Throws podcast. Again, check all of our links down below. TikTok, Instagram, YouTube. I need the podcast networks, all of that. Be sure to check those out. Check out our individual pages, of course. Jay coming back with the Routine Jumper podcast. Check out my TV on basketball stuff as well. We have all the content that you want for basketball, and you're going to be able to follow along with both of us and also with the Hit Your Free Throws podcast. But yeah, hopefully you'll have a fantastic day. Thank you guys for your support. Continue to support the Hit Your Free Throws podcast through all the links down below. Jay and I will be back next week for another episode. So hope you all have a fantastic day. This is TV. This is Jay. We're signing out. Peace.